Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Weird World of Knowing. I've got a very exciting guest today. It is my first love, I must admit, EFT tapping, emotional freedom technique. And to have the number one, Dr. Peta Stapleton, is an absolute gift for me here today. So I'm very excited. So I'm going to have to try and calm myself down so that we can get through.
So Jason,
Yeah, but I don't want to. You know what I mean? It's just such a beautiful, buzzy, gorgeous feeling. I don't want to calm down. So we're just going to go with the flow as it is. Gorgeous. So Dr. Stapleton is the world leading researcher in emotional freedom technique. And that involves all the brain changes that are happening during what's happening with EFT. So, can you please, Dr. Stapleton, just explain a little bit of what that actually means? But first of all, let's just go and talk about a little bit about you and the background that actually brought you into all of this. So, what is your background?
absolute pleasure. Yes, thank you, Rachel. I'm a psychologist, kind of by profession, if you like, and my first kind of love or private practice work was with eating disorders. So I was out there, brand new graduate. This is obviously over 25 years ago, and thinking I'm going to save the world and help all these people with eating disorders, and of course, miserably find within a very short period of time, the first couple of years, that a lot of the traditional talk therapies, particularly in that space, just didn't really work. So I felt quite ineffective myself in my training. And I was complaining to a colleague, as you do,
Mhm.
complaining that all this training I'd done and none of it was actually helping anyone. They weren't recovering. So I felt quite ineffective, if you like. And I was open enough to try to find other modalities. Now, it was him, my colleague, that actually said, I've come across this kind of weird technique. He didn't actually even explain what tapping was. He just said, this weird technique, I think there's some value in it and it might actually help, with the anxiety and things like that, with, gaining weight and eating habits and things like that again. I still didn't know what he was talking about. So I did dismiss him for a couple of months. And then he actually, and I wrote about this in my book, he was at one of my support groups and we had lots of women turning up every week trying to get help. And a young girl had a panic attack. And he just sort of gestured, I'll take her outside while I'm doing the lesson. And they came back really quickly within a couple of minutes. And she was calm and composed, yet a few minutes earlier, she'd been hyperventilating, clearly triggered. Anyway, I kind of thought, don't know what's happened there. But at the end of the night, everyone's gone home. And I said to him, I actually did write, I hope he didn't pop her a Valium or something like that. That's really unethical. And he said, no, I did that tapping thing I've been trying to tell you about. Now, because I'd seen that outcome from that really heightened dysregulation state of panic to very calm and composed, and she finished out the group within a couple of minutes, I needed to know more. And I guess, even though I'm a conservative clinical psychologist and an academic, I've also got this open part to me, and I've always had that. I credit that to my father. He's very into alternative therapy. And I've just always been open. I've never worried too much about what's the evidence. And 25 years ago, we didn't know as much as we know now. So I did say, I said, I need to know more about this. Tell me what it is. Let's go learn it. And of course, the rest is history as far as doing research and things like that. So yeah, so I kind of am outside the square.
Yeah, but that is, I think that's the joy really of tapping, isn't it? Because it literally, the more heightened the emotion that someone is suffering from, the faster it actually works. And that can be a little bit daunting for people who don't really know what they're doing in a way with this, because that heightened emotion is the most scary part, isn't it? That intensity of emotion that we deal with. So the releases that actually come with that can actually be a little bit weird as well, can't they? With tapping, Can you just explain a little bit of those weird, those weird bits that I actually love because it just sets
Yes,
me into giggles quite a lot of the time.
right. So it turns out, as we're using this tapping technique on acupuncture points to just calm the physical sense of the body, and of course the brain follows along with that. People will often have kind of moments in the middle of doing their tapping where you just mentioned it. They'll either start laughing, they will sigh, they will yawn, they will show other signs of kind of disconnect. I've even had clients in our trials that look at you halfway through tapping and go, I don't remember what I was tapping on. What was I saying again? And all of those point to the signs that as we're starting to kind of separate out from something we've held really close, perhaps an emotional issue or even a negative thinking style, as we create that space with that, people have that distance and they have that kind of opportunity to react differently. And we even see it when we, follow up in our trials, and it might be 6 months later. And we say, so how have you been? How's that food you were tapping on? And literally they look at you dumbfounded and say, I have no idea what you're talking about. I've never eaten that food in my life. We're like, well, you were eating 5 of those cakes a day or whatever it might be. And they, okay, was I? They were total confusion, but it's just not part of their world anymore. And so we know that the neural reconnections that occur after tapping are real, and it can make people appear as though they've forgotten what their issue was that they actually did that tapping on, let alone the physiological signs of
It's
release of
like a huge reset, isn't it? It's this huge reset that regenerates this new version of themselves sort of moving forward that they just can't even relate to that past version at all. And I absolutely adore that aspect. I find it quite funny when if someone's booked a few sessions, and I've had quite a few people just not turn up for the last session because they've forgotten that they actually needed to be there. So I've either texted them or said, are we not bothering today? Oh, no, no, I do. I want to come because I need to tell you about all these really positive things that have happened. Can't remember
yes.
what it was that I came for, but now there's all these really positive things that I want to work on. And I think that's a really beautiful way of using EFT to actually really bump up all the positives, because we see life as sometimes as being in therapy a very negative way of working, but actually those positives can be really just as powerful, if not even more so when you get there, in shifting yourself forward in that constant state. What are your findings on all of that?
Absolutely, I totally agree. And, often that's what makes people, when they first come to tapping, think, oh, what is this? It feels counterintuitive to what we might be used to in traditional kind of talk therapy settings where we're trying to reframe the problem, we're trying to find a meaning, that sort of thing. And of course, in tapping, we say it for what it is. So that is a real acknowledgement of the distress or the emotion or the negative thought or whatever it might be. And that can be quite surprising to people to actually own what's happening for them. Yet what you're saying happens really quickly, particularly in comparison to maybe other approaches. That shift and that change into that kind of freedom, if you like, which Gary Craig back in the beginning was a genius of naming it emotional freedom techniques, because it is, they reach that freedom. They might kind of pause, forget what they were having on, laugh, sigh, whatever it might be. And they've reached that level, and that positive reframe comes in naturally. And that's what we see as well, whether we're working privately one-on-one or in groups in the trials, everybody kind of achieves that outcome somewhere along the line, and then they forget. And of course, that's that lovely apex effect, or they just forget that it was ever a problem.
Which is beautiful. So let's just go back a little because I want to now sort of touch on the fact that a lot of other therapies that you've sort of compared EFT with your research against CBT, for example, and the findings there are really quite startling in the effects of the longevity of how things last with EFT compared to something like CBT. Can you give us some examples of that from sort of a PTSD and chronic pain type of
Yeah.
example? Because those areas are really quite profound.
Yeah, there's a range of studies now. Ours here in Australia, we've looked at kind of the comparisons for weight loss and things like that with CBT. We've also looked at it for major depression, EFT versus, CBT for depression, that kind of thing as well. And certainly worldwide other studies for PTSD, like you said, and test anxiety, performance anxiety, those kind of comparisons. And ultimately, the outcomes show that by the end of treatment, both groups tend to get their outcomes. So it is, in fact, that CBT participants, we know it's a gold standard, they will achieve those outcomes. But when you look at the data for any of these conditions, you mentioned chronic pain, and that's been our most recent research, but depression, PTSD, food cravings, weight loss, test performance anxiety, where the outcomes occur for the EFT participants, and usually they're randomly allocated, so they don't get a choice in this, their outcomes are achieved, if you like, or occur in half the time. So in the first couple of sessions compared to the end of treatment when the CBT participants actually also achieve their outcomes. So if you just looked at end of treatment, you go, oh, they're actually both really equivalent. They're getting the same outcomes. But when you actually have a look then at things like cost effectiveness, how fast do those outcomes occur, they actually, for EFT, always occur in the first couple of sessions. And when we're looking at things like, finances or time available for therapy, knowing you've got something equivalent to a gold standard, it might be really important for people to understand you actually can achieve that a lot quicker. Now,
Mm.
studies have actually also compared EFT to other what we call fourth wave approaches like EMDR, the eye movement desensitization therapy. And the EFT EMDR outcomes are comparable in terms of how long it takes as well. So any of those approaches that use that real somatic kind of body based as part of it appear to achieve it much faster than just the talk therapy and the restructuring of thoughts and practice, lots of practice required to
Mm.
keep those gains. Our studies, we've done 12 and 2-year follow up on our studies. Often the CBT group lose their outcomes. So a year down the track, 2 years down the track, they actually drift back to. So if you don't practice it and keep it going, you don't get permanent kind of neurological shift, which means they drift back. In our food craving trials, they were as anxious about food and eating those, the food cravings were back at that year mark. Whereas the EFT people couldn't even remember what the food was that they did their tapping on. So that's what we're seeing across all those sort of domains. PTSD roughly is 4 to 10 sessions for EFT. Yet when you look at CBT, that's a gold standard, or trauma focused CBT, the recommendation is 18 to 24 sessions.
Mm.
So, there's not much comparison there, particularly things like finance or time
Yeah.
is important to somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been, as a training college myself, a small one, admit, I've been keeping well researched myself since COVID, really, because the government sort of handed us this beautiful platter of symptoms which we work with anyway. So I just took that and incorporated that on an every session basis with all of my clients now. Now, I've developed a TARC EFT, which is literally tapping around the clock or tapping around the meridian clock. So we called it TARC for tap around the clock. It saved us rocking around the clock. And the effects are absolutely phenomenal because I went against everything that EFT is taught, and you don't need to know what happens with it. It just works. But being an avid researcher from TV, I wanted to know how it works. So I went into the depth of each meridian and put sort of 3 charts together to work with my clients so that they had this real understanding and education of actually, well, why it works. And they could look at a chart and see where emotions got stuck behind each meridian or which physical symptom got stuck behind. And then the third chart looks at the positives. So they've got, it's like I call it my little tricycle, really, where you start off on the back wheels and you end up on that positive first one, really pedaling forward the best beautiful way that you can. Now, through my findings, I collect 35 symptoms and people tick off that every time they come and see me. But I don't do it straight after a session. I do it at the beginning of a session. And people were coming with one issue, but they would have 21 plus symptoms. So their burnout levels were massively high. Now, at least 50% of the people that come and see me now have 21 plus symptoms. Are you finding that as a norm at your end as well?
Yeah, I'd have to say, coming out of a pandemic as well, not just that psychological symptomology. And of course, even here within our country, psychology being available is becoming a little bit in that psychologist books are closed for 6 to 12 months because the demand is so intense for people to want to access therapy. But even the chronic health issues that we're now seeing present as a result of intense stress, and we had certain areas in Australia, and I'm sure it's the same around the world, that were in heavy lockdown for months and months and months. And that effect then on people's not just mental health, but physical health. So we're actually seeing kind of an emergence, if you like, of autoimmune illnesses, stress related illnesses, and they're coming through into kind of therapy settings as well. Because, after medical tests might be done and really they're not showing anything medically, sort of at that screening level, they're being recommended. We think you might need to go and see someone for therapy, which may or may not go down well when someone's got physical. But so, yeah, we're seeing not only what you're saying, Rachel, but also that flip side there. And I'm still predicting that we get to see some of that emerge in that chronic health illness area.
Yeah. Yeah, because
Yeah.
I'm finding those figures are not startling anymore. It's in a way, I'm considering that the new norm. So that when people, I say, fill in this chart, please do not be surprised if you've got 20 or more symptoms on here. That is now normal with the way
Yeah.
that people are. And there's a real mixture of emotional and physical symptoms on there. And I think they're really quite surprised when they start to go through it, how many they have, but also equally surprised that within a couple of sessions, how much has shifted. Because again, about 50% out of 21 plus symptoms, at least, between 48 and 50% reduction in those symptoms is massive.
Yeah.
So I think it now to actually collect data, I think is a real turning point for therapists and something that I really strongly believe that people should be doing now in their own practices. Is that something that you would advocate?
Yeah, and we even have a masterclass available for EFT practitioners about how to do that so that they actually can contribute from. And I think this is really important because clinical research done through universities is very tight as far as inclusion criteria, lab control conditions, and often may not reflect that true lived experience in the field. And I think the value that practitioners, by collecting that data pre and post sessions or even periods of time is so much of so much value even in that research space that even, the American Psychological Association absolutely want to see that the techniques or modalities that they approve, and EFT is going through this process right now at the moment, they want to see that it still works and holds up in the field when researchers aren't controlling it, e.g. people like me in a university. So that's really important is that, like you were saying, practitioners to get on board. And if anyone wants access to that masterclass, because we sort of say, here's where to go to find questionnaires and here's how to kind of do it, absolutely reach out and we'll let everybody have that. So I think, you've really nailed a point there that it's that translation, isn't it, from theory and research into practice and then feedback the loop the other way to say, yeah, it's exactly what you said or no, not quite right or whatever. And I think you guys can potentially add more to the value of the research outcomes than what universities can sometimes.
Absolutely. So, folks, get in touch here and we can put you in touch with Peter and the research documents or directly with the university, however that's going to work. So, I'm excited about that as well. Thank you for that. Now, you're also doing some very exciting work with Joe Dispenza, I believe.
Yes,
Tell
yeah.
us how's that come about? And tell us about that.
It was, and this is one of those sort of serendipitous kind of moments that you don't kind of plan for, but maybe we really do unconsciously. I don't know. So I knew all Joe's
Yeah,
work.
let me just say, I think that definitely the first thing I ever did was Reiki and become a Reiki master.
Yes.
But then
Yep.
literally the world of tapping seems to have opened up energy, psychicness in a whole different realm. Combining everything that I do together with all of that, I think it just opens you up to so
Yeah.
many weird, beautiful synchronicities. So
And
please,
so I'll tell you about the
please
Joe
tell,
one.
let us hear the weirdness of this.
Yeah, so cool. So a girlfriend and I, many years ago, probably 8 years ago now, had decided Australia was ready for these types of conversations at a conference level, so an event level. So we actually decided we would put on a 3-day conference. We would invite people we wanted to listen to speakers. So it was all about us. And we would have evidence based. So it would be EFT, but meditation as part of that space, but very fourth wave and mind body. That first conference was in 2017, and we're just gearing up for our third one now. Anyway, on our list was Joe Dispenza because we'd read all his work, we'd been practicing some of his, and we were like, what the hell? Let's just see if we can get it. So, of course, we send the email. We have all our other speakers lined up. It's all great. We don't hear anything, and we were like, oh, well, we'll just let it go. So both of us, Kate and myself, just did meditation, let it go, and went, that's okay. Maybe somebody else or the right person is supposed to come in. And I'm not joking, a couple of days before Christmas the year before, I get an email from Joe's personal assistant. And Paula said, we're very sorry that we've been delayed in this. We were just trying to iron out a few things, but you won't believe it. He's in Perth, which is just the other side of the country. It's only a 4-hour flight. the week before. And yes, he would love to do this. Speechless, going,
Wow.
really? Okay. So anyway, Joe turns up and he actually said to me on that weekend, well, I really, because our events are about 300 people, so they're not big. Here's retreats if you ever go to them. I'm like,
Huge.
thousands of them. And he said to me, I don't normally do small events like this anymore, but something called me to do this. So I said yes. And so we were chatting on the Sunday. Both of us weren't needed, or everyone's in workshops. Anyway, he's the reason why I wrote the science behind tapping, because, of course, he orchestrated that with Hay House and he wrote the foreword for the book. But it was in that conversation that I said, I know you collect lots of data. What do you do with it? And he said, well, we don't have a relationship with the university or anyone. We've never been able to find anyone that really understands it. And stupidly in the moment, I went, I'll do it for you. He nearly died. And he did sort of message me a week later and said, were you serious? And I'm like, yeah, let's just do it. So I said, I've got the resources. I have the students. Send me your data, because he sent me 5,000 EEG scans.
Oh,
That
wow.
was, that was the first research. I'm like, you have to write it forward for my book. So we kind of developed this, really lovely kind of working relationship. And of course, he's been out to Australia, came back for our next event in 2019. And where we published that very first paper. So it was over 250 novice meditators, when we showed that they really got into that gamma brainwave state, not knowing how to meditate very, very quickly, like hundreds of standard deviations above the norm. So we published that with him. We've since finished, literally only 2 months ago. We had a primary school. So these are children that are 4.5 years to 12 years, went through a 10-week daily Dr. Joe meditation in their classroom every day for 10 weeks. And
Wow.
we've just finished collecting that. So it's actually about to be published, and we're going to repeat that with a school in Florida. So yeah, Joe's become quite a good colleague and a friend, and we've got lots of research that's sort of rolling, and it's parallel to what we do in EFT. Like he wrote in the foreword to my book, tapping gets you to here, meditation gets you to here. They're just two different roads, but to the same place. And he taps as well, and I meditate. So we share that kind of, the outcomes and things like that. So we're happy. The outcomes of that trial, just to let you know, for that particular term, the school was able to demonstrate that the behavioural complaints from the teachers, as well as any reported incidences, absolutely bottomed out in that whole 10-week period, compared to, and it is a school that's got some problematic kind of children, and being young, they don't always have those regulation skills. They absolutely self-reported a significant difference in their levels of happiness, their strengths and beliefs about themselves, which you can see reflected in self-esteem. And we have photos of them meditating, but we had stories coming back to us because they journaled every week about what they liked about meditation. And they were all different meditations every week. And they were writing like to each other, and they were reminding each other to, be the pond. Because I think Joe said that in one of the meetings, they're like, be the pond. And we were just like, going, oh, this is just phenomenal. So yeah, so it's been great. So we're about to publish that one, and
And I
throw those
think
out.
that is just the way forward, isn't it? Being able to get everything that we do to children so that they have this at the beginning of their lives, instead of, halfway through like we've been, and then having to do catch up to clear all the stuff. If they're able to use all of this from such an early age, consistently, what will the world be? I think that's the exciting prospect, isn't it? What will the
Exactly.
world be? There's so many exciting prospects of calm, beautiful people wanting the very best for each other, and not going into the negative as consistently, and they're able to pull themselves out of that to reframe it, or even forget that they had it all together.
Mm, exactly right.
I think that's just the most exciting act of all. So yeah, look forward to many more of those jobs for you and Joe, and people like me as well. Being able to get out into schools and for them to utilize the techniques that we have for the benefit of all. Can you give us any figures from that at all, yet or not?
Yeah, so absolutely. So when we look at statistical significance, we're trying to find, is there a difference between when they started to they actually gave us feedback. So we got their questionnaires every week. So we actually have 10 data points that we actually can have a look at. And so we grouped them and looked at the younger children and then the older children. And then we also looked at the type of meditation, which one they liked the best. So Joe did 5 meditations. So they listened to one for 2 weeks, then they'd move on to another one. They absolutely love the breathing ones. And I think, that tells us something about kids and that ability to regulate when they learn how to do it properly. So they loved that one. They also loved, he did teach them towards the end of the 10 weeks, kind of what we might call dimensionalizing an object or materializing. He pitched in such a way that, is there something you would like to come true in your life? They love that because, of course, you get a personal vested interest in something like that. But statistically, the differences between where they started with things like self esteem, whether they believed in the strength of themselves or they felt they had too many weaknesses, they all changed. And we did a 10-week follow up a term later. So we could see that it held. So statistically, it absolutely worked. And then the qualitative feedback that they gave us in their diaries was, and the teachers were telling us that their classrooms were calmer and the students were asking for the They were only supposed to do it in the mornings before they started. And they were asking for it after lunch. They were asking for it in the afternoon. And they were like, oh, and so they just had to press play because it was Dr. Joe obviously coming through and the teachers just sat there for a couple of minutes. And we made sure the time of it was suited to their ages. So the older kids got a little bit longer, but the little kids didn't. But they loved it. So those feedbacks in trials are really important for us to see, not just the numbers. The numbers stand up, but yeah, that feedback from the teachers and the students is just amazing.
Oh, it is. And I think that point of them asking for that self-regulation to come back into their lives, they know how effective that works, is just the most beautiful gift of all. And I did this with, it was a network meeting last week, and I was doing a talk, and we'd just come out of, everyone introducing themselves, and the room was really quiet, a very, very busy room. And before I started, I hadn't intended to do this initially, but I looked around the room and I just felt the energy. I said, okay, let's just take a minute. Let's just take a minute. And we just had a few minutes of hand on heart, just bringing in some colours, just really being present. And it took a while, I must admit, for them to come back and for them to want to come back into the room and to carry on. But the size and that release of tension was palpable.
Mm.
It was literally just a 2-minute little exercise. But when you're in it, it actually feels much longer, doesn't it? Because you're actually giving your body time to actually relax, and it is that timeless experience. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, the more that we can encourage people to take a few 5 minutes in your morning and afternoon work life, school life, to be able to do these sort of things will make all the difference to your working relationships, won't it?
Absolutely. Yep, totally agree.
Love
Yeah.
it. Okay, so before we finish off, Peter, let's go into the bit of the weird. Can you give us an example of probably one of the most strangest things that have happened, or outcomes that have happened through your work with EFT?
Oh, wow. Strangest things. Um, I'll talk about speed because sometimes people might, I don't know, wonder how long things take to change or whatever, something like that. I worked with a young girl, so she had some difficulties with. So this is private one-on-one work, not our trials. Difficulties with friendships, and so that's what the tapping. And it was quite a strained kind of relationship with another student who'd been her best friend. So it was quite personal and had been going for months and months and months. It was quite a strained. And so we were just processing just how you feel and what was happening. It was very emotional. She was crying. And we were, and so we literally did nothing else except for that, probably only an hour and a half, do the tapping on her feelings. She didn't believe they would ever, she wasn't trying to reach an outcome of, she just wanted to be able to let it go herself. And there was anger in there and things like that because she realized it was kind of, affecting her probably more so. But she was like, I've just got to be able to let it go so she could move on. So that's all we did. I'm not joking. The next day, so she went to school. The next day, got the phone call. The other girl came up to her out of the blue and said, I just want to apologize for everything that's gone down. And this girl had been starting rumors and bullying and like the full works for 4 months previously. And literally, my client, let it go the next day. Like, I've seen things happen quick, but even I wasn't expecting that outcome, and it wasn't one we were trying to achieve. And it wasn't even about forgiveness or self-compassion. It was just about to let go for her own sake. So like you would know this too, you see those outcomes where it kind of like takes your breath away, because it really is that, oh, wow, I was the one that was probably in the road and I let it go, and then look at what happened. That kind of thing. And just
And I
crazy.
think that
Like,
and
lots
that's a
of
fabulous experience for her as well, but
and a teenager, that's right. So
yeah,
can you imagine?
and it
Next time you
was
got to try tapping, she's like, yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the results are they do speak for themselves, and like you've just said, I now have to sort of warn people in a way that this might happen in a much um, wider spectrum than you think, so that the people that may have been an issue in your life, they may come straight into your life as an example of how either you are going to change to that environment or how they have now changed because you have let your energy system release what needed to be released. And they are
Yeah.
constantly amazed when they come back and perhaps the next you won't believe you said it might happen, but literally within an hour, she was on the phone and da 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 da. Or, I bumped into someone I'd not seen for 10 years that I'd not seen this person for 10 years, and I bumped into her in a cafe and everything was fine.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Uh,
amazing.
it really
Yeah.
is. So yeah, thank you for that. I think the speed is a beautiful aspect of what happens with any of
And even if I can throw in the physical changes that occur for people, we've had clients that literally, Joe's seen this too in his meditation workshops, might be covered in hives or rashes. And as they tap, it just sort of remits, and there's no rashes in front of you, yet it was there before. Our chronic pain trials that we've just finished, we've just finished 6-month follow up. And I'm getting these emails from people, and most of our chronic pain patients were suffering on average 15 years, severe chronic pain, like 9 out of 10 on all our measurements.
Mm.
Like, it really ruined their lives. They couldn't work, the full works. And I'm getting emails from people saying, I forgot I was in your trial because I don't have any pain. So chronic pain no longer rules their life, yet only 6 months ago, they did a 6-week program with us, and it was all delivered online because of the pandemic. And they're like, oh, I forgot I was in your trial because I don't have any chronic pain. What are you talking about? I'm like, this thing ruled your life.
Yeah.
And they're back working, and they're back engaged in family. And I just sit there and kind of go, oh, this is fantastic. But at the same time, it's like, oh,
Well, that's exactly why we need the figures, isn't it? Because when
you know,
people are literally forgetting that that was such a horrendous part of their life, and that because they're just able to get on, obviously they don't really want reminding of being in that, but to actually have those figures to say, yeah, that you were on a thin scale here with this, insomnia, muscle fatigue, chronic headaches, whatever it was, you were on a 9 and a 10 on a daily basis. And now look at you just cracking on with your life. I think it's yeah, tapping is the most wonderful gift I think that we have been given. So thank you very much, Gary Craig, to bringing that to us. And Peter, honestly, the research that you're doing is absolutely invaluable for EFT practitioners and people who are interested in energy healing at all. I pass your book on to people who are doing Reiki, who do MBIR, NLP, hypnosis, because the statistics in there and all the evidence and conversations that you've had in there speak the same language really. For it crosses so many different realms, I think. So everybody, please do get, and let me get your book because I've got it
oh,
here.
thank you. Thank you,
You
Rachel.
must get Science of Tapping, because there, if you're an EFT practitioner or you're interested in tapping, then do get this. And then, if you I need to do this one as well. And if you're interested in TARC EFT, you need to get my book so that you're a bit tattered
Cool,
and torn,
absolutely.
because
Yeah.
so there's that as well. Um, which goes in and actually gives you an education of what happens behind the meridians. But that's only if you're sort of interested in that sort of aspect. You know, tapping just works, whether you know why or not. Now, is there anything else, dear wonderful lady, that you want to add for us, for us to take away?
Yeah, I'm imagining our audience listening are fairly open, just given the title of our podcast here, Rachel, and I'm so glad that people are staying open to lots of things, and like you say, lots of things get us to the same end point, and most of them are in this kind of fourth wave, which is about body and things like that. If anyone is curious or wants to join us for any research trials, they're always offered free of charge. So we do have in the pipeline our next sort of body of research trials that are going to be offered using EFT tapping. So if anyone just wants to follow us on social media or jump on my mailing list, that's where we let people know. So we will have some tapping trials coming up, and most of them these days we do offer online and live, so people can jump on anywhere in the world and join us. So I'll let you know that one of them coming up is with the wonderful EFT master, Dr. Carol Look, and we're actually going to replicate her EFT for eyesight and wearing glasses trial that she did many years ago. So
Oh,
that's
fantastic.
developed.
I might
Yes.
fund that because, I must
Yes.
say that since I've started, doing energy work, I always sing the song I Can See Clearly Now, the rains. It just seems to be,
How wonderful.
every time I think about my eyes, that song just comes up. So whenever
Oh,
I'm
no,
walking the dogs, I'm singing
wonderful.
the song. But literally
There
my
you go.
eyesight for the past 8 years, my prescription has reduced.
Mm.
I'm reaching
Carol's
the age.
extreme.
I'm reaching the age
Yeah.
where really it should be sort of increasing, but it's been reducing year, year. And
That's
if
it.
I did
Yeah.
this a bit more intensively,
Yeah. Well, there you go, Rachel. You can jump in our trial. Absolutely.
fantastic
Carol.
opportunity.
Yeah.
So yes,
Yes.
people come
Yeah.
and join us,
Yep.
and we'll all
Yep.
jump on this. That'll be great.
That
It's
sounds
wonderful
yeah.
when other people facilitate as well, and we can get
Yes.
on there. So that's a
Yeah.
wonderful opportunity.
Okay.
And thank you so much for your time. An absolute gift. It's been worth getting up at 6:30 to be here with
Oh,
you.
God. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's the world time zone, everybody.
Thank you
Yes.
so much.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you, Rachel.